One. Good afternoon from downtown Minneapolis. I'm looking outside right now. It's about 76 degrees and sunny. No, the truth of the matter is it's about 34 and it's trying to snow outside. I'm with Joe Morocco from Cafe Imports and Derek De La Paz from Peace Coffee in town. Joe, would you begin by introducing yourself?
Absolutely. Like he said, I'm still Joe Morocco, and I'm still at Cafe Imports, where I am the Director of Education, and I do a lot of roasting, a lot of fun stuff around coffee, and also primarily sell green coffee. I'm a senior salesperson there. I also do a lot with the Roasters Guild and the SCAA, where I teach people and also try to get people to talk about coffee a lot.
And Joe is humble. If I remember correctly, you did production roasting for probably 8 years?
Oh no, I did production roasting for, a couple of years.
And barista
A long time.
semi-champ from the Midwest region?
I was the South Central Regional Barista Champion one year, yep. And I've
Humble
done the
man.
U.S. championships and stuff like that.
Humble man. And Derek, how about introducing yourselves to the crowds at home?
Yeah, so I'm Derek De La Paz. I'm the head roaster and quality control manager at Peace Coffee. I'm coming up on 10 years of production roasting coffee in Minneapolis this May, so it's been a really fun voyage for me. I tend to spend most of my time doing sample roast cuppings, production roast cuppings, and then a lot of R&D and development. So all of the seasonal holiday blends and all the alchemy coffees, those are kind of the things that I focus a lot on. And then just upkeeping the production roast profiles. But I've been in coffee for, like I said, a little more than 10 years. And I've actually been taught a few classes by Joe, and it's been great to be part of the SCAA and the Roasters Guild. And I'm excited to be here.
And he has taught classes with me, so.
These guys are both overly humble. How about Justin Nichols' background on Peace Coffee and its unique mission?
Yeah, so we're really about fair trade, organic, traceability. So sustainability is also a big part of our company. So we do bike delivery for all of our Twin Cities accounts. We do biodiesel vans for all of our outer accounts. We buy 100% fair trade organic coffee. We really try to focus on direct purchasing from the co-ops at origin, and so that's a big part of our mission. For me as a roaster, I think the most important part of Peace Coffee is that we have long-term relationships. So I think that Guatemalan we buy for our dark roasted Guatemalan, it's from a Picaform co-op, and we've been working with that coffee for around 11 years, and I personally have been roasting it for around 9. And so that kind of thing is really important to me. I really like the long-term relationship where we're not looking necessarily for the quality cup every year from origin. We're looking at the way that the origin can kind of have some variance in green, and that as a roaster, we take that and we work with it to try and make the cup consistent for the customer. And so that's really what we're really all about. It's been a joy to work at Peace Coffee and to kind of move that mission forward.
So Derek, it's good to have you and Joe here. Our objective here is to bring in local talent, those people with good ideas, skills, knowledges in the roasting business to help us advance our own roasting. One thing we brought along today is a baseball trier. We want to show it. Let's see if we can put it on the back camera. Nick, let us know when we get that well done. And that bat last night was used in Kansas City in the World Series. Hauser hit a sacrifice in the bottom of the 14th. I had that mill lathed overnight, flown in, and now we've got that as a trier here at Mill City. So that's a unique item that I'm willing to sell to you for $1,800. Thank you, Joe.
And it definitely will help with the roasting.
And that's either ash or hickory, if need be. One of the things I wanted to review this month, Joe has been talking about density. Prior to working with Joe, I just grabbed elevation to determine density. And since I've been working with Joe, what I do is take a graduated measuring glass with incremental marks, and I weigh out 1/4 kilo to see what line I come up to. The Bariti that we're working with today is right at 345 milliliters for 1/4. And so that helps me determine, yeah, indeed, that's really a high grown. I did a Brazil, and it was close up to 360 milliliters. So in next month's Roast and Learn, On Home Barista, we're taking a look at density. One of the measuring ideas we'd have. Joe, you had some further details about that.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to show this to our little trier cam too real fast.
So look okay,
So you can
Nick?
see that up close and personal. So one of the things that I would recommend that you do if you really want to be exact with this is very slowly turn on some water and slide the water down the glass. If you put it right on the coffee, you'll get a bunch of air bubbles, and slowly fill to the top of the coffee with water as well. And that will move any kind of air that is making space in there out of your way. So you get a much more accurate density reading. Because if you have a Pacamara, for instance, those Pacamara beans are going to be very large. And so packing those into that space, that space that is left between the beans is going to take up a lot more room than, say, if we're packing a pea berry in. So the bean itself may be one density between the Pacamara and the pea berry. They may have the same level of density, but more space with the Pacamara. So you want to make sure, too, that you're, if you want to be exact, you can be exact. But at the same time, you can also be very practical with it. You can say, I understand that the Pacamara is taking up more space, and I'm using my best judgment when I'm making this measurement. I understand that there is space involved.
And again, the whole purpose on doing this density test is to see how well the green is going to absorb the BTUs that you're providing it. It's
That's
going
right.
to help you best profile your roast as you go along, so that you understand density as part of not only processing you're considering, your charge size, but also your density beyond elevation, and measuring it by how many milliliters a set weight occupies.
Correct.
Fair enough?
That's right.
So let's lay out the day for you. We're going to be roasting an Ethiopian Yirgacheffe. This comes from Cafe Imports. It's the Buriti region. This is a natural. We loved it. We cupped it out. We gave it an 88. I think you guys did as well.
That's right.
Great natural. It's probably one of the cleanest naturals I've seen. And one of the things I love about it, it's a piece of cake to roast. It roasts as evenly as any natural I've ever roasted. So I really enjoy it. I called it a cherry cordial. There's milk chocolates in it. A great Bing cherry in there. There's a cherry wine in there, and it finishes with a vanilla. So we're featuring it this month. Grab some off the website. You won't be disappointed.
Agreed.
Joe's going to go ahead and roast a kilo for us. Derek will jump in there and critique Joe's roast. At the end, we're going to do two things. We're going to look at the profile that I used yesterday to roast this. We're going to look at my roast for roasting defects, and we'll look at Joe's to see if he can determine any defects. As well, Joe and Nick have queued up some PNG images so that you can see the defects, how to groom a roast, how to identify the defects, most importantly, how to manage your profile so you don't get those defects. Fair
Correct.
enough?
That's right. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I've got the coffee ready to go into the drum. My drum temperature right now is right around 412.
I like that picture.
Yeah, pretty nice. All right.
Hang on, Joe.
Tell me when you're ready, sir.
I lost my mouse. There it is.
You lost your mouse.
I'm ready when you are.
I am ready, set, and go.
Charge.
So now that coffee's in that drum, 412 is a good temperature. Generally, you see drop temperatures being, or charge temperatures being in the neighborhood of 400 degrees. This is a little bit higher. This coffee is a little bit more dense, so we're going to give it a little time to absorb the energy from the drum itself.
And based on last month's lesson, I kicked the burner off. Joe runs without the burner for 60 seconds. And the airflow, the air setting here is at just at a setting of 20.
Thank you, sir.
You're at 45 seconds.
Excellent.
Yeah, piece we're probably dropping anywhere from 350 to 400, depending on which machine we're on and what the coffee we're doing with it is. Right in
Tell
that same
them
range.
which machines you roast on.
Yeah, so we roast on a Renegade 1-pounder, a Primo 50-pounder, and a Diedrich CR70. So a one-bagger, basically. And it just depends on the machine. The small Renegade, we're tending to do a 370 to 400 drop. The bigger Diedrich, we're probably lowering it to around 350 to 360.
So at a minute in, I have popped my gas on, and I'm at 4 bars of pressure.
We were talking before the live stream today about the personality of a roaster. And I don't mean the individual, but rather the machine. And Joe emphasized last time we were together, we're giving guidance. We're not giving rules. We're not giving commandments. You get to know your roaster. You know how to interpret the guidance you're being provided. But that roaster that you're working with has its own personality.
That's exactly right. And that personality will express different things with different coffees. So you may get a brand new coffee that you haven't roasted before, and all of a sudden your roaster is doing something weird. So understanding the principles behind what's happening will help guide you in how to make an adjustment when you do see those weird things. Like for instance, if I go pull out my dryer, like that. If I pull out my dryer and spill beans all over. If I pull out my dryer and
He did it again.
I did it again. And I see a bunch of smoke or something pouring out of my dryer port, then I know that my drum is interacting in those beans in a way that is adding more pressure. So maybe that coffee is more dense and I need to adjust the air in a different way at a different time than I would normally.
Joe, you topped out at 46 degrees Delta bean temp.
Thank you.
And you're at 3 minutes, and your bean temp is at 255.
Excellent. We're going to continue to let this ride until I start seeing a little bit of a change in the coffee, and then we're going to decide on how to adjust it. And I'm going to clean up my mess.
So notice he's not overcompensating on that gas gauge. Some of the guys I talk to at home have a propensity to get on that gauge and turn the gas up, turn the gas down. Take it easy. You've got 1 minute increments that you can determine if you're ahead, behind, or right on course.
Yeah.
So Joe's almost 4 minutes into this roast. He's not touched the gas.
Nope. Yeah, if you think about driving a car, when you're driving that car, if you're just hitting the gas on and off, on and off, on and off, and you try to repeat that exact path that you took that car on, there's no way that you're going to be able to hit that gas on and off in the same exact way. Chill out. You know, it's an oven and you're baking the product. You're not baking it in the defect sense of the word, but you're adding heat in a way that's baking this.
4 minutes, 295, rate of rise 35.
Excellent. So things are looking pretty good here still, so I don't need to make an adjustment quite yet. I'm going to go ahead and check on how the pressure is building in here by pulling out the dryer and seeing if there's any smoke or anything coming out, and seeing if I have any kind of change in color. Thank you. If I have any kind of change in color, then I may want to start adjusting that. And I can check the pressure with with the lighter.
Nice.
And it's still sucking air in. Right now I'm feeling pretty good about it, and I think I'm going to let it continue to stay with the same airflow and the same gas pressure all the way up until we see yellow.
5 minutes. Gas hasn't been touched. Air hasn't been touched. Joe, you're at 5 minutes, 325, Delta bean temp 30.
Excellent.
Nice.
So our bean temperature is actually starting to kind of level out a little bit, because as you drop coffee into a really hot drum, let's think about that as being a distance between the temperature of the coffee that you're dropping in and the temperature of the drum. As the temperature of the drum is pulling the coffee toward itself, the coffee starts to slow down because there's not as much energy that's separating the two spatially. And so now as we're getting closer, since I haven't made any adjustments at all, that's going to naturally start slowing down and getting ready to approach first crack. Where are we at?
You're at 550. Temp is 350 with a delta bean temp of 27.
All right, I like to shoot for about 6 minutes for yellow, and we're getting right about there.
You want me to mark it?
Go ahead and mark yellow. So at this point, I'm going to open up my airflow to about 40, get that airflow rolling through. And I'm going to bring my gas down just a touch.
Bring it down just a little bit.
I'm at about 3.75.
So the RPM on the drum?
60.
Setting of 60. So both Derek and Joe at drying bumped down the gas by about 10%.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm going to show you what's going on with the coffee. It's starting to get a little darker, and you're starting to see some of that chaff peel away.
And you tend to think that the dry process coffees are a little more chaffy?
They are a little bit more chaffy, yes. It's really difficult when you're milling a coffee to remove that chaff from the coffee, especially when you have the cherry adhering to everything. There are a lot more levels or layers, I should say, that dry mill has to go through, and so they have a lot more chaff.
7 minutes, 380, delta bean temp 17. Very nice
Okay.
rate of rise, descending.
So now it's getting really nice and even. I know that we're going to be nearing first crack before too long. I'm going to go ahead and open up my airflow all the way as I'm preparing for first crack. Now, one of the things that is the case is the Maillard reaction and caramelization do not happen if moisture is present. You have to have moisture away. Of course, as we're breaking down the molecules in the coffee, new moisture molecules or new H2O molecules are snapping off of larger existing molecules like polysaccharides and things like that. So there is new steam being made.
8 minutes, first crack, 395.
And I'm going to go ahead and adjust this down to 2.5.
Okay, so he went down on the gas by 25% at the start of first crack.
So if I want to have those Maillard and caramelization reactions to take place, I want to make sure that there's no steam building up in the drum and that I'm able to pull that out. Also, convection is a really good heating mechanism once you get past the endothermic reaction. Endothermic, I like conduction. Exothermic, I like convection.
And explain convection again for the listeners.
And convection is that heat of airflow or molecules that are moving, the heat of moving molecules. So like boiling would be a form of convection. I'm going to show our audience this coffee real fast again.
Yeah, it's starting to get kind of a baked bread kind of smell.
Let's
You
smell
can
it from here.
Possibly
I
see just a touch of smoke rising off of
I
that.
love the aroma of this coffee.
It's developing fast. I can smell sugars and stuff too.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
And before
Toast.
we went on the air, we also ground this coffee to make a pot of coffee, and it just filled the office. Joe, how are you doing over there? You're
Doing well.
You're at 9.5. Your delta bean temp is 5. And
Excellent.
your bean temp is 410.
I am getting rid of some more coffee beans that I had dropped in the cooling tray accidentally.
And
Having
what
fun
we're
with the
gonna
char.
do,
Yeah, it's always hard to use the trier.
once this gets dropped and cooled, I'm going to ask Joe and Derek to switch places, and then we'll have Derek groom the roast and critique Brother Joe's roast.
Excellent. There's some nice brown coffee, and I think we are about there, sir. I'm going to go ahead and turn on cooling, turn on our mixer, turn off our gas all the way, and open her up.
Harrison Boyd has a question. When you're referencing air volume, is that on a 0 to 100 scale?
It's merely our scale, and when I say 20, that's not 20%. That's a raw scale of our setting here. 60% is what we treat as the maximum we like to use on this particular machine.
There are some groomables in here that I'm going to leave.
That's probably residual from my previous roast. I can tell the way he was smirking at me. And Harrison, did we answer your question?
All right, so our roast is done. I'm going to trade you spots, sir.
Okay. All right.
Tell me what you mean by grooming the roast, Derek.
Well, I guess for me it would be, after we would get a production roast done like this, we'd want to get it cooled and then containered in some kind of like preventative bag where we could let it age for a day. And then the next day we'd start cupping it. And then we would look at, for me, I look a lot when it comes to cup qualities for production roast. I look a lot for balance of cup, whatever the origin is. I'm looking for the certain nuances of that origin to come out. And one of the pieces I really like in coffee is the softness of acidity. So I feel like acidity can be a marker on roast development, on overdevelopment, underdevelopment. And when I hit that place that I really like is where the acidity kind of softens up. And it's almost as if like the sugars have come out and the cup has gotten a little bit sweeter and a little bit softer.
You're using the term production roast. Can you describe that for those?
Yeah, so I guess like a lot of times with coffee professionals, it's a little confusing when you're talking about new coffees because you have the sample roast, which is a roast you do according to SCA standards, purely just to look at the sensory analysis of the green coffee. And that's a very light roast within these certain parameters of time and temperature. And it's basically just for sensory analysis, for sample roast cupping. But then you also have production roasts, and production roast is what you would offer up for sale for customers. And the cupping form that you tend to use in production roast cupping is a sample roast cupping form. And so there's a little bit of confusion sometimes around cupping and around what you're actually cupping, whether you're cupping production roasts or sample roasts. And so when I talk about production roasts, I mean coffees for drinking or for sale, for customers, not for internal analysis of green coffee.
And so let's just take a Peruvian. You're roasting a Peruvian. You're getting it out there for production. How often are you going back at that one to test your production roast to make sure you're still hitting the marks?
Yeah, that's, so at Peace Coffee, we move through a lot of coffee, and so it's quite challenging. So I'd say that I like to hit every production roast once a week. So I like to cup every production roast blindly off of the machine that it comes from once a week. And then that would be kind of just give me a ballpark range of how accurate that profile is hitting that coffee at that point. And if the coffee's been around in our warehouse longer, then it might take a little more work depending on if that profile isn't cupping out accurately. And then if a coffee's newer, it might take a little more work based on getting that coffee into our lineup and really developing that profile. But all new lots that arrive at Peace, I sample roast cup and then production roast cup to keep that really accurate. And so when a new lot arrives, it's a little bit more focused, 2 weeks of focus, probably 2 or 3 times a week. When a lot's already into flow, it's probably more like once a week I'm maintaining that profile, unless something jumps out at me like crazy on the cupping table.
And then you tweak your roast.
And then I tweak the roast, yeah, depending on if the coffee's older, newer, how it's aging, how it's cupping, how the roaster's running.
What does it mean you're going to groom Joe's roast? Is that cool yet?
It's almost cool. I'd say it's just slightly to the touch, depending on, there's a pocket here and there.
Okay, what's grooming the roast?
So I'd say, well, I mean, for Joe's roast, I mean, it's super tight. Like the coffee is really high quality, you know what I mean? So there's not going to be a lot of variance when it comes to like, I want to say like, maybe like the perfect roast, the perfect place for this bean. I think that sometimes when you get to the really high quality coffees, they're easy to roast, like you said, but getting to that perfect spot is really hard, I want to say. And to me, there's like one place where a bean sits in its really, what I call the sweet spot. And the higher quality coffees, those windows are really narrow. And so having quality roasters roast high quality coffees, it tends to be hard to like reinvent the wheel when it comes to that production roast. So this roast it'd be challenging. You know, I don't see any blatant roast defects.
You got any Quakers in there? What's a Quaker?
Well, there's a few Quakers in here, and a Quaker is basically like a less dense bean, is the way I take it as, like a floater. It could be a floater, it could be something that just didn't take on the sugar, but it's basically a bean that doesn't have the density, and I associate that with sugar, and then it will never brown. No matter how much you roast it, no matter what you do to it, it's always gonna be a light roasted bean. And it actually is physically lighter. When you pick the bean up, you can feel if it's a Quaker or not by the lightness of the weight in your hand.
So with a natural, the first thing you're gonna groom out is your Quakers.
Oh yeah, when it comes to picking out the beans, for sure. Yeah, I tend to be as a roaster over the cooling tray. That's kind of something you can't stop reaching your hand in to take out any variant roast beans. Quakers are first and foremost, for sure.
Now, he says you've got a good roast going on over there. Are
Well,
you
thank
as
you.
convinced of it as he is?
I'm never convinced until I have it in my mouth.
Okay.
Yeah, right, right. I agree, for sure.
You seem
But
to
it
be
looks beautiful.
itching to go over there and double check it.
Yeah.
Would
well,
you
I
like
was,
to?
I was wanting to grab a tray here and show our audience in the trier window here. And I just want you guys to see I'm just picking up random. I'm not doing anything. There's no brown beans in my sleeve that I'm pouring out here. This is a full natural, so you will see a little bit of variance from seed to seed as far as color contrast is concerned. It will be a grade. This would be a Quaker right here. And that Quaker is a Quaker. It has a pinhole where a bug went in. That is not tipping. That's actually a bug defect there on that coffee. And that bug probably went in and stalled out that seed's development early on. This is a Quaker as well. This particular Quaker here does not have a bug defect on it, and it's a little bit darker than the other Quaker was. It just means that this seed didn't get nourished as much as it was maturing. Sometimes Quakers will be a seed that comes from a cherry that was not all of the way developed or all of the way ripe, so it could be an underripe seed. Either way, the Quaker is exactly what Derek just said. It's a seed that is underdeveloped, and that results in a lower density coffee.
I'm not sure if you can catch it over there, but Derek is chewing on the bean. You want to explain how you use that as part of your quality control?
Yeah. So one of the things that one of the more experienced roasters taught me early on, because obviously as a roaster, as soon as you dump the coffee, you want to know how you did. And it's really hard to like wait a day or wait for the time period to brew it properly. And so he actually suggested that you just take a bean and you crack it. And first he taught me to smell it. And you actually can smell the release of aromas that come out when you crack that bean. And a lot of times you'll be able to tell, like definitely with the development of nuance and sweetness, the smell of the bean. You'll smell like with these, I get like a floral note. I definitely get like a note of berry, of like red fruit. And right there it makes me, I know as a roaster that the development has been proper along the development of the coffee as a production roast, because those qualities are going to come out when you grind it, and definitely on the brew method when you brew it. And then to go the next step would be to actually chew it and put it in your mouth and eat it, which can obviously build residual flavors in your mouth. But then you can kind of get at the development, the inner development of the coffee. And if you get like a vegetal note or a green kind of taste, then you know the coffee maybe needs a little bit more time and more development. And if you get a lacking of flavor or a kind of baked, oaty taste, then maybe it's been overdeveloped. And that can just give you a ballpark range about where to go with the roast next time, based right on the cooling tray.
Last week, it must have been Nick's roast that I took home. It was a Kenyan. And I brewed it up, and it was like that vegetal. And I thought, what in the heck is going on here? And I did just what Derek did, and I bit in the internal part wasn't as developed as the external part of the bean. The truth of the matter is, it was my roast. It wasn't Nick's, but I wanted to use him as my foil to shield myself from criticism.
There's nothing more insulting than tasting your own roast defects.
Yes,
Right,
yes. But that's
And not having a scapegoat.
That's the point. On the home barista thread, I put up the profile so everybody could see the profile. Joe took a look at that. Derek took a look at that. And it's the roast I did yesterday. Joe, if you could take a look at that, Derek,
Absolutely. Let's
see if you
check
see
it out.
any defects.
Kenyans, I think Kenyans are hard to roast. Me personally, I don't have a lot of experience with them, but they're such a dense bean that I the few that I've been around, I've struggled with the development, the inner development of those beans.
Can we get electricity so we can turn this light on? And then we can maybe show two different roasts in our screen here too.
Okay, so this is the
Go ahead.
same coffee that I roasted yesterday, the Bariti.
Give
The
that a smell.
profile is posted both on our
nice.
website and the home barista list. Take a look at it. You can see how I profiled it with a descending rate of rise. The way I took after that, Joe's roast, and I'll post that on home barista, ran 2 minutes, 6 seconds after first crack. I believe mine's 2 minutes, 10 seconds after first crack. So probably pretty similar in terms of,
And overall close time too, right?
Yeah.
Yours is 10:39 and his was 10:12.
yeah.
So really close in the overall.
How's it look, Joe?
Looks great.
Yeah, it's nice
I'm going to
aromatics.
show you all a side by side. I don't know how your color contrast is where you are, but as far as how they look side by side, they look very even, very close in development. Yeah, it looks great. I'm not seeing any defects. I'm going to inspect a little bit further. One thing that I like to check, even on a light roast, is I'll just pick out a couple of random seeds and I'll crack them open along the seam. And I'll look at the top and the bottom. I'll look at the top and the bottom, each tip, and I'll see if there's a little black jet. That black jet is referred to as tipping. And tipping is a defect that comes from too much hot air. This bean that I randomly chose did not have tipping. This one, I believe, does have tipping. And I don't know if you can see this, but I cracked this open, and along the tip, right here, it's burnt. And you can see where that tip got a little charred right there at the tip. Now, I will tell you that you will always have some tipping in every batch, no matter what.
It's inevitable.
It's inevitable. One of the reasons for that is coffee has a soft point. That soft point is there so that the new little baby plant has an area to grow out of. It's the path of least resistance. So as that plant is growing in there, it tries to find its way out. If you build up too much hot steam in the coffee, then it will jettison out and it will start the process of cooking at that point more quickly than the rest. So even though the rest of the coffee has gone to one point in roasting, that little tip has gone further at that same roast level. So that is generally caused by too much hot convection too early in the roast. And understand that that variance will be there because you have varying degrees of density from one bean to another, especially when you're roasting something like a natural process where sorting is not quite as stellar as it might be for a washed, or when you have a coffee that is a pre-roast blend, or when you have a coffee that may be from a very large group, a co-op, where multiple entities are bringing coffee from 1,600 meters down to 1,100 meters or something like that.
Nick, you've got images of coffee defects. Are we going to cue those up so Joe and Derek can describe them as we go along? Tipping? Let's
Tipping
cue it
is
up.
live, so you can see there that there is a black point. If you crack that open, it almost looks like you're looking at a mini volcano that occurred in that coffee. All right? That's the only defect that I can find on these particular coffees right now.
And there's going to be some tipping in every roast. You get above 5%, you got to be concerned. 5%, you're all right.
Yeah, I mean, I would be concerned at maybe even a little higher than 5%. If you can find, if you're seeing it consistently throughout your roast, then that you know that you hit it with too much hot air too early on. There's another roast defect. This one isn't going to be listed like on any kind of SEAA format. Some people would not consider it a defect. Some people would consider it a defect. And that's another one that I'm seeing here, and I call it puffing. Some people call it popping, but that's when the bean, you see the seam is flat. Usually that seam should stay flat as your coffee is expanding, but sometimes you'll see the seam will splay outward and the inside of the coffee will puff out. If you take one of those seeds, which I'll try to find one here real fast. If you take one of those seeds and you open it up, which I'll show you what I mean. Here is the puff seed. You can see that seam
Singing okay, Nick?
has opened up a little bit. So as I crack that open, if I can show you, right here, this is not the center seam, but there's a little pocket. I hope you can see that at home. Are they able to see that?
Nick? So.
So. Anyway, open that up and you'll see that between the outer layer of coffee and the inner layer of coffee, prior to getting down to where the silver skin folds within, there'll be a bubble. The reason that that bubble is there is that during the initial drying stage, you were drying the coffee out, or I was drying the coffee out too quickly on the outside, and the inside held on to its moisture. That moisture on the inside now is under pressure in order to try to get out. It doesn't have even heating that went all the way through to the core. And that pressure builds. And as soon as it reaches its new boiling point, or the new point of evacuation where it can move out of the coffee, you get a flash of pressure that expands the interior of the seed. This is when the seed is still green to yellow, and so the seed hasn't become plastic enough to expand quite yet. And so that will tear that little seam apart interiorly. And so then the structural integrity of the coffee itself is damaged. So that by the time you go through first crack, it just opens all the way up. It's very flimsy at that point. The reason that I would call that a defect is because, one, it shows that there's not even or controlled heating. And two, if you open that seed up that much, it can stale a lot more quickly than a regular roasted coffee would.
Right. So in a cup, you'd have variance of quality based on those oxidizing faster and giving up some of their good flavors, and other beans not.
Absolutely. Yep.
And how would you go about writing that? Is that like lowering your airflow?
Yeah, I would have a little bit more gradual heating in the beginning, and I would continue to keep that airflow off just a little bit longer, or a little bit lower.
Sure, as we go through each defect, Derek raises the point. How do you manage that? How do you correct it? So let's do that as well.
Yeah, and we see that in our Sumatran coffees that we get at Peace. We have that. We've been talking to Joe earlier about that. It's an important piece of roasting. Yeah.
That's right. And we were talking about moisture. There's a lot of belief out there that one coffee varying in moisture by a couple of percentage points from another coffee means that you want to approach that coffee differently in the roast. And I want to go on record as saying that that is actually kind of a myth. If I have one balloon that's very large and it has 12% water in it, and I have another balloon that's very small and it has 12% water in it, they do not have the same amount of moisture. And they're going to respond very differently. Moisture is only important as it pertains in relationship to density. And so if you have a very dense coffee with very high moisture, then you want to treat that coffee differently. If you have a very low dense coffee with very low moisture, you want to treat that coffee very differently. Generally speaking, however, your moisture has dropped down to about 1.5% of the overall volume of your coffee before you get all the way through yellowing. That's what that stage is about. It's about drying that coffee out.
So if I understand correctly, when we get to yellow stage, we've dried.
Yes.
When we started, that coffee was at about 11% moisture, and at the yellow stage, we're down to 1.5% moisture.
That's right.
Very good. Joe, when you do a mixed size roast, let's say you've got 14s, 15s, and 16s in there, do you have to treat it any differently on moisture level issues?
Well, I would say 14 to 16 is a pretty tight spread.
Okay.
But if I had, like, let's say 14 to 18 or 14 to 19, where you really have a large spread in your bean size, then I would treat that differently. I would give it a little bit more time to homogenize that heating across that bed of coffee.
Yeah, you'll see that in some of the Konas when they do an estate blend of green coffee. It's everything the tree's got to offer.
Right.
And that'll be 14s and 19s.
Yep.
And so you really got to take your time in getting that moisture homogenized down.
That's right.
Within that blend.
Now, I will say that, and hopefully this isn't taking us too far off course, but I will say that I am a fan of pre-roast blending whenever it comes to blending.
Sure.
Maybe we should save that for another show.
Pre-roast blending.
Pre-roast blending.
Okay, we'll do that.
Yeah.
That's a very unpopular place to be, and I'd love to share that.
Yeah, but lately I just hang out with a guy from Germany, and he was talking all about all pre-blends. And I was just kind of like, and he was a barista from the barista side. And I was kind of like, okay, yeah, that's great. Because from the roaster side, it makes some things easier.
Oh,
you know?
yeah. Production is so much easier.
Production's easier, yeah. And it's not as complex. But I think as roasters, we want to make things really complex. And we want to make every single origin its own roast profile and its own style and its own cup. And so it gets overly complex sometimes. And I think that we shoot ourselves in the foot.
Joe introduces blending. I think that's on the docket for January or something. I stay 6 months ahead in planning them out. And Joe and I brainstorm on subjects that would be helpful to you. And that's where we'll take emails and suggestions. Please send them in to me. Joe at cafeimports.com or Dave at millcityroasters.com. And we're more than welcome your ideas, the stuff you need to know. You're the ones watching this, so please let us know. Next defect, Big Joe.
Our next defect is scorching. And one thing that I want to say about almost all of these defects, they all have to do with overheating, except for with the exception of two. And the taste characteristics that you get from the majority of these defects is going to be char. So for these defects, including tipping, you have tipping, scorching, and you don't have to show this slide, but we're also going to talk about burning, over roasting, and chipping. But for scorching, this is on the conductive side of your roasting.
First part of your roast.
The first part of your roast, or you can scorch later in the roast as well.
Right.
And we can talk through some mitigation, but when you look at your coffee and you're seeing places on the coffee that are dark versus other places that are a lighter shade, then you know that the surface of that coffee is getting two different levels of heating at some point, and that comes from conduction. And remember, conduction is that heating of touch.
Mm-hmm. So to mitigate that, you're going to turn up your RPMs.
You can turn up your RPM. So that is your rate of speed in which your drum is rotating. However, if you turn it up too fast, you get centrifugal force that will push the coffee to the sides of the drum and hold it there if you're spinning very quickly. So you kind of have to find a happy medium. You also, if you start with a drum that is too hot, or you work with a system that is more geared toward conduction, like for instance, Derek, you roast on a Diedrich. Mm-hmm. Diedrichs, I found San Franciscans that have a little bit more conduction than like a Probot, for instance. Mm-hmm. These drums will scorch a bit.
Yeah, definitely.
There can also be some radiant heat scorching. We've seen radiant heat scorching in drums that are perforated. So if they're exposed directly to flame, the outside of that coffee may get scorched a little bit before the rest of the coffee gets caught up.
So a perforated drum presents a new challenge.
That's right.
Okay, good. Joe, sometimes with a Brazil, it tastes ashy to me. Mm-hmm. What's that about?
Well,
it's your poor roasting, Dave.
Are you smoking right before you taste this?
No.
Just kidding. So if you are roasting a natural coffee or roasting a pulp natural coffee, which the majority of Brazils are, during that process of drying out, some of that sugar and some of the fruit stuff, let's just call it, will adhere to the outside of that seed. Yeah. And that will cook at a very different rate than a polished, washed coffee will. Yeah. That washed coffee is very strong. It's very clean. There's nothing on the outside, really, other than maybe some silver skin. And when you look at a natural processed coffee up close, which this is a very clean, natural process.
Super clean, super good color.
I'm going to try to find an example here, though, if I can.
I've got a...
Here we go. You want to shine me on to the small camera here? So washed coffees will generally have a white seam through here. This one has a white-ish seam.
Raise it up a little.
And
that's
here,
perfect.
This one has a little bit more dark toward the middle. And that's some of that fruit-like stuff that's adhering there. Mm-hmm. It could be mucilage, but mucilage is on the outside of the parchment skin. So that parchment skin has been removed, but some of that stuff will still seep through.
Right, the sugar.
Yep, the sugar especially. And it will burn very easily in the drum. It just heats very quickly, and it's really difficult to get rid of it. If I see a super chaffy natural, I will spin it in my cooling tray for longer, or if you're a home roaster and you have the time and diligence to do this, just rub it. Rub all of that ashy stuff off of the coffee. You'll see your table fill up with black chunks.
Yeah, I had
Oh, definitely.
a natural from one of the producers, not through Cafe Imports, and it had a lot of the residual schmutz, let's call it, right along that seam, and that gave me an ashy taste. And I thought maybe it was because I had given it too much heat.
Yeah, that's a tough one because a lot of times you'll think when you taste it in the cup that it is from the bean, but you're right, it's from the actual kind of like leftover little bit of rift and paper in that center seam.
Yep.
Yeah, we have a grade 3 Sadama natural that we roast, that we have challenges like that all the time. And then as it gets drier, that gets even more fragile and it gets even more volatile. Those exterior pieces just tend to burn really easily. And
That's
it comes
right.
out looking very mottled. But like I said, we run it longer in the cooling tray, and we'll even run it over like with our hands and stuff like that, just to kind of break off some of that stuff. And it's challenging.
Yeah, another trick is as you're approaching first crack, slow it way down. You may bake it a little, but you'll avoid that char flavor.
Yeah.
And I also will drop those naturals even lighter than I would typically drop a coffee. It may still be, 2/3 of the way or 3/4 of the way through first crack, and I might be dropping it. But when you taste it, it doesn't have the burnt flavor. It has very nice acidity, very nice sweetness. Sometimes, again, you have to break the law in order to make a coffee taste good.
Very
I
good.
agree, for sure. We go 10 degrees lighter maybe on some of our naturals.
Yep.
And they cup out, they taste sweeter and heavier bodied, so darker roasted, longer development in some of our washed.
That's right.
It's kind of crazy.
Nick, what's our next one up there?
I believe we have chipping next, which chipping is a feature that you see generally if you're taking your coffee upwards of second crack. Again, this is on the exterior of the coffee, but there's also an interior thing that is happening. So this can be caused by both conduction and convection. I've heard differing opinions, but basically it's caused by too quickly going into and through second crack. You'll have those areas on the surface of the coffee that are a little bit more fragile, and as your cellular structure is beginning to break down, pressure is being built on all sides of that, and that area of fragility will just be a little bit too fragile to hold that pressure, and so it'll blow off a cap, kind of like a volcano erupting.
So you're seeing chipping typically when you go into second crack, as opposed to if you're dropping it as a City Plus or something.
Right.
Yeah, you won't see chipping at a lighter roast because your coffee is still too hard, but that doesn't mean that you have not done damage. That doesn't mean that it wouldn't start chipping if you've moved too quickly during part of the roast. There's just no way to see
know.
it until you move into second crack.
Gotcha.
Right.
So sometimes if you want to judge how you're roasting, move into second crack. Do your ruin the coffee a little bit to see whether or not something you were doing before that would have led to tipping or chipping or scorching.
Right.
Very good.
For sure. Yep. Yeah, we see that on our Guat Dark. Our Guat Dark, we take the darkest roast level possible, and we tend to hit it pretty aggressively with heat all throughout because we want to capture some of the acidity and some of the nuance even in the dark roast. And so we'll see 10% of the beans come out with chipping on that because it's just the aggressive way we roast it.
Yeah.
Yep, for sure.
For sure. Another one is facing. Facing is basically scorching, but it's just on the flat side of the coffee. And a lot of times facing will just be a completely black, flat side to the coffee. And that is definitely due to the conduction. If your drum is spinning too quickly or your drum is spinning too slowly, or if that drum is too hot and that face gets stuck up against the drum, it's going to burn. And that's usually the side that will scorch. So facing is a little bit more exaggerated type of scorching. So I don't think I have a picture of that to show you all, but just take some green coffee and put it in your frying pan and let it sit for a while and you'll get facing.
And that would be more repaired based on like throw weight, changing your drop weight at less coffee
You
in the
can
drum,
fix it that way,
or
too.
RPMs, not so much about airflow.
You can fix it with all of the above. So
Okay.
if I add more airflow, I might be pulling more heat off of that drum.
Right,
If
right.
I add less beans, then there are less that are crowding the drum. Or if I've got that centrifugal force that is making my beans lie flat and taking the journey too long, if I have more beans, then that can help to mix that coffee up a little bit more.
Not too fast, not too slow.
That's right. Yep.
Only just right.
Roasting is easy.
That's why, I mean, when you talk about RPMs of your drum speed, that is a variable that may or may not be something that you play with every time. I would say if you are playing with your drum speed, my advice would be to minimize that as much as possible. So maybe when you have conduction in the beginning, especially if you have a drum that you don't have airflow control, maybe start it with a little bit slower because you do want that conduction, and then speed up your drum in place of bringing air through. But if you have really good airflow control and drum speed, I would lean more toward playing with airflow than I would drum speed, because there's a lot more control in the airflow than there is in the drum speed. So, but as you can tell from my roast earlier, I'm also a minimalist whenever it comes to making all kinds of adjustments. I want to find a good, repeatable, manageable roast.
I think that's helpful. I know when I started roasting on our 1K about a year ago, I over manipulated it. I was playing with it and doing this and doing that. And since I've been working with you, the adjustments I make both to gas, airflow, and RPM are very, very little, very, very minimal. And when I do change it, I change it minimally as opposed to radical changes.
And that just comes with your confidence and control. Yeah. So as you get more confident and you're controlling it more, you know that the subtle adjustment that you make is making a big difference, and you want to be able to measure that difference later so that you're not, if you make too many adjustments, then you don't know what it was that created whatever good flavor you have.
And we measure that how? By cupping.
By cupping.
By cupping.
Every
by cupping.
time. Okay, so our next one, we've covered tipping, scorching, chipping, puffing. Some people call that inflating. The next burn one is simply over roasting. If you roast your coffee too dark, you will burn it. That's not to say that a dark roast is bad. That's to say that a darker roast than you were wanting is bad. So if you're shooting for a dark roast, shoot for that dark roast in a way that also still preserves some of those flavors. If you're buying, coffees that we're selling, those coffees are pricey, and we know that. And you might as well just buy a cheap blender if you're going to go really deep into second crack with that coffee, because you're homogenizing it with all of the other coffees that are out there. You're burning off more of the unique characteristics of that coffee. So the lighter you're roasting, the more unique characteristic you'll get to an extent. I look at roasting kind of like I look at light. So your green seed is white light. There's no flavor to it. It goes into your prism, and you break that white light out into all different flavor or color spectrums. One coffee may have more red or blue or something of that nature. So the darker you roast it, though, the more diffuse that color spectrum gets, until now again you have no flavor. So if you want to control flavor, you've got to stay within a range of under roasted and over roasted. If you're tasting all char and you're not tasting all of the nuance of the coffee, I personally would consider that to be over roasted for specialty coffee. At the same rate, our other defect is under roasting. If it's tasting more toward that white light, that green, grassy, or hay, or peanut butter in a bad way, sometimes it'll taste like a barn, sometimes it'll taste really like a raw seed. It's a raw commodity seed. Yeah, leguminous. It'll taste more like beans,
We've
peas.
all done it.
Yep, we've all been there. And some companies or some individuals will lean more toward skirting the edge on the light side, and some will lean more toward skirting the edge on the dark side. And truly, those master roasters out there can get just on those edges and find exactly what they want, and then repeat that every single time.
Harder said than done.
Harder said than done.
Those
That
of
is
us
right.
that roast right in the middle really are roasting the most easiest, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, a medium roast is you're well within that range of color spectrum, and so you're going to have really good flavors throughout that range.
Yeah.
And so even if you're not hitting the same roast every time, or even if you are going slightly beyond or slightly under, you're still going to have really great coffee. So medium roasts are a pretty sweet spot to be in.
Yep, for sure. Not as much edges. Less edgy.
We've got about 5 minutes. Other defects you want to cover?
The last one that I want to cover is baking. And obviously we don't have a picture of this because this is more of a taste defect that comes from how you're roasting coffee. So if you are stalling out in the ability to caramelize or to have the Maillard reaction, which those reactions are taking the properties of the coffee and converting them into flavor properties, if you stall out, then you won't continue those reactions. So your coffee may continue to change color or expand, but you won't have all of the flavor that you wanted. It'll taste kind of salty, minerally, just kind of overall flat, hollow,
Tepid.
tepid, yeah.
The acidity's gone.
Yeah.
And the way I
No
check mine
liveliness.
is I look at my profiles when I finish up a roast, and I look at 1 minute increments throughout that whole roast. And if that rate of rise is plateaued and just hanging there, then I get a little bit concerned that I might have baked it. Sometimes I can get away with a minute, but if I've got a 2 minute plateau in there, I've lost my acidity and
That's
lost
right.
some of the sparkle
Oh, yeah.
that's in there.
Correct.
Roasting defects, you've heard it all. Yes, Nick.
I've got one more question from Harrison.
Harrison.
Question from Harrison.
Just verbatim. How about when you split a bean and see a larger amount of space between layers? Is that from normal expansion and bean structure?
So the question is, how about when we split a bean and we see larger than normal expansion? And what I would say is that goes back to that inflating or puffing that I talked about earlier. So that is too much heat too early in the roast. It will happen to a bean or two every single roast. But if you see that puffing across the norm of your coffee, then you may want to slow it down in the beginning of the roast. Give it a little bit more time.
Very good. Any concluding thoughts, Derek?
No, I think the roast is really great. I think that a lot of the information we shared was really great. I think as a roaster, you just gotta, it's repetition. So like less variance in your roasts. So from roast to roast, don't add as much variance with knobs and stuff, and really just try and be consistent and keep track of what you're doing. Bring it to the cupping table, cup, and then just keep revisiting. You know, basic scientific process is the best for roasting, just like it is for many other sciences.
Very good. Derek, it was good to have you here.
Yeah, thank you,
Joe,
Derek.
as
My pleasure.
Always,
My pleasure.
it's good to talk baseball
blast.
with you.
Oh, yes.
Before we go live and after we conclude, we'll be talking. We're both rooting for the Kansas City Royals.
Yeah, one of the only times you'll hear me say go Royals.
Yeah, go Royals. Next month, November, I am looking at November 23rd, our next one. We're going to have Adrian Blasky from Cafe Imports in and David from Clayda's Coffee in town, one of my favorite shops. We're going to look at the best home preps and how to go at them, pour-overs, quantity of coffee, different measures of preparation, so we look forward to that. I've got coffee roasted for November, but I want to cup it out and make sure it's out of the ballpark, so to speak, before we offer it, so we'll be doing that. And so this is a wrap from Minneapolis. Thank you all.
See you in December.
Thanks.